And you're live.
Okay, we're live.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. First of all, let me introduce the audience to you. You're Tim Johnston, and you've
Okay.
got some great books coming out. This is first one is called Distant Sons. And can you talk a little bit about how this idea came to you and how you decided to get into it?
Sure. Well, I should start by saying it takes me a long time between finishing one book and starting the next. It's a long process of getting the other one out of my head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I try to just sort of be patient with that process and wait for some notion to come to me. And somewhere along the line, I got this notion. It was pretty unformed, but it was an idea that I had these two books that were sort of in the same kind of hybrid genre, literary suspense.
Yeah.
And I had the idea of sort of not creating a sequel or anything like that, but maybe sort of taking one character from each of these two previous books, Descent being the first one, and
Yeah.
The Current being the previous book before this one, and just sort of making two of those characters cross paths in some way and have a whole entirely new story built around that, not dependent on knowing, those previous two stories. But also those two stories, those two previous novels are their backstories. So there's some reference to them, but it was kind of a challenge. Like, can you do this and can it stand alone, without someone having to read those previous two books? And I like that idea. I like the challenge of that. And it was a challenge, but so far, when I sent it to my agent first, who'd read both those books quite closely, albeit some time ago, she didn't make the connection between the previous two books, and she liked the novel as it was. So that was a great sort of first sign to me. And then my editor at Algonquin, who had read the two books some time ago also, she wasn't my editor for the previous two, so she gets a little pass there, but she hadn't made the connection either. So those were two good indicators that it could stand on its own 2 feet. And the other thing I'll just say is I sort of fought the idea for a while, because that's kind of my process, is like not just to jump on the first idea that comes along, but to try and, almost to forget it if I can. And if I can't, then I start writing. So obviously I started writing.
Well, one of the things that I really, really enjoyed was your writing, as well as the story, of course. But I'm wondering, did you have a lot of training in writing? Is this just your natural way of doing it? Does it take you a long time to work it through?
Yeah, all good questions. So a little biography, I guess, is in order. I did go to the University of Iowa as an undergraduate and took quite a few sort of literature and writing courses there. And when I was done there, I went to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst to get my Master of Fine Arts in creative writing. So I had quite a bit of training in what we might call literary writing, particularly of short stories. And when I got my second degree from Massachusetts, I went out and became a carpenter. And that's what I did to make a living for 25 years. And I just kept writing during that time. And I kept sort of, honing my craft. But I had a pretty good foundation of training by that point on how to, on craft and storytelling. And, the rest is just comes probably from reading, reading a lot, reading and rereading the books that that have inspired me over the years, and learning from them, and eventually I started publishing novels. So that was the path.
You've won some pretty high praise from your fellow authors, And I was trying to find the right word to express what I thought about your writing, and I couldn't come to it. But I did come to something Michael Corita had said. May I read that?
Oh, please.
He is also one of the finest prose stylists in the game, stacking polished sentences with a master touch. On Distant Suns, he says, an intricate, haunting novel, sure to resonate with fans of Dennis Lehane, Peter Heller, and James Lee Burke. And of The Current, he said, masterwork of mood and language, slow burn tension.
Mhm.
How does that grab you?
Yeah, I have to, I hear that slow burn from time to time, and it never sounds like the best pitch for a book, but it grabs me just fine, and I'm always sort of secretly, and maybe not so secretly, pleased when the writing is pointed out, because it's always been my goal to write novels that, or stories that were not just good stories, with compelling plots, but was the kind of writing that I had studied and liked to read and wanted to practice. Which is to say, I didn't really set out to write, genre. I didn't set out to write thrillers or crime or anything like that. I really set out to write just the best novel I could write and the best sentences I could write. And to answer part of your question, that can take a long time. With Descent, the first of these three novels, it was about, I think it was like 7 years before I finished that book. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's not to say I was writing constantly. I wasn't. Back then I was still making a living as a carpenter, so I had to go out and do that. But so by the time it was picked up and finally published, and people started saying, "Wow, this is quite a page turner," and he's really good at the thriller mystery genre. And I was like sort of scratching my head, because when it takes you 7 years to write a book, it feels like anything but a page turner. It feels pretty pokey, but so yeah, I'm fine with all that. And Michael Corita is very generous with his praise, and he's got a great book that I was lucky enough to read early, coming out this year also.
Well, one of the things that I noticed and I found interesting in Distant Suns, we're talking about part of it, you create the crime from 1977, and then fast forward to 2018 and how this case comes up again amongst these people. The chapters that are written in 1977 were all italic. And one of the things that, and I hope I'm right on this, is that when you had dialogue in that, you didn't use punctuation marks.
Right.
You didn't use quotation marks.
Right.
How did you decide to do that?
Well, sometimes I'm going on rules that I've sort of established previously. And where I pick them up, I'm not really sure, but I feel like, because the italics in my mind are a signal that we're back in time. We're back in a different time. It's like a signal that just says we're in the past. And since we're in the past, it's not as present or immediate. And so I feel like the quotation marks are kind of intrusive in that kind of world, when we're sort of in the past and it's kind of just almost like a memory. And sometimes when we're in the present in 2018, and Sean, for instance, is thinking back to just a couple of weeks or a month ago or something. And if those passages are of any length, I won't use quotation marks in those either, because it's kind of a rule, like it's a memory or something, and quotation marks don't really belong in, or they're kind of, to me, they kind of speak more of the present.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had I have a daughter who used to be a high school English teacher, and I said, "What is this all about?" Well, she didn't know either. So,
It's okay. I'm all right. It's not like it's supposed to be. I don't know. It's sometimes I just get these things in these ideas in my head, and I just have to stick with them. It's just kind of rules.
I think that's a real gift to the reader because it's different and it's something for you to figure out and notice and that sort of thing. So I think it's a great idea. How about your characters, Sean and Dan? They seem to really, well, they're not the only significant character, obviously, but they were important to this story, the Distant Sons.
Yes, and what do you want to know about them?
Well, where did they come from? Are they modeled after somebody that you knew, or are they modeled after your imagination?
Right. So, in the immediate sense, they come from the previous two novels. Those are the two characters from the previous two novels that I imagined meeting up. And they are as fictional made up as I can make them. You know, I tend to think that a little bit of my own experience in the world, my own way of experiencing the world, slips into most of my characters in some little way or other, you know. But neither of these characters are based on people that I could point to and say, yeah, this was a model for this character. And if I'm doing that, I feel like I'm not really giving the character a chance to establish his or her own personality and character. It's almost like I have maybe a sense of what this kind of character, who this character is in a very general sense, but it's going to take me some time to get to know them. Like I know nothing about you. I've met, you know, we just met. I have a kind of general sense of the kind of how you present as a person, but I don't know anything about your real life. So it takes time for me to develop those characters, and hopefully I develop them in a kind of organic way and not, you know, sort of based on anybody in particular.
Yeah, well, they're all interesting characters.
Thank you.
And I liked that, and I'm going to use one of the other reviewers, and I can't recall who it was, but talked about the slow burn through the story, and that's another thing that there was some undertone all along that kept the reader thinking, I should know what's happening here, and you have to keep going to find out how. And it's not obvious and it's not dramatic. It's just there. How do you do that?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with my own process, because I don't really know. I don't know hard and fast what's going to happen, or even if I have a pretty good idea what's going to happen, how we're actually going to get there. So I don't plot out these books. I have a kind of a starting point that gets me going. And then I have maybe a general idea of where I think the story is going to sort of end up. And I think the slow burn is a part of that process of figuring it out myself. You know, so I'm not trying to jump ahead to something more interesting or more exciting or page turny. So I'm in the moment. And sometimes that moment goes on too long, and later I have to edit it down, to something a little less slow burny. And that's why you have good editors around too, to help you do that.
Well, it sounds like it was one question I was going to ask you, because some authors say that they plan ahead. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, so they knew the trajectory.
Yeah.
There are others who say, well, I started writing it and the characters just went away with it and made the story.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying? I don't see it being that free.
No, I'm not like, oh, let's see what these characters are going to do today. I usually have a kind of a scene that they're going to be in, and I kind of have an idea of, the arc of the scene. But I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't plot everything out. I know authors who do and do it very well. And they generally, even if they do plot it in pretty great detail, they often, they're smart enough to know that it doesn't always work that way, that you have to be able to be flexible and make changes to your plot. But I really kind of like to see where the story is going myself, even though I have a general idea. I don't like to have it all figured out. I think that takes some of the, not only the excitement out of writing for me, I think it takes it out of the writing itself, personally.
Yeah. In the book Distant Sons, there was a crime committed back in 1977 where 3 young boys on different occasions disappeared. And then in 2018, suddenly things come together. Well, they don't suddenly, they very subtly do that. Why that kind of plot line where you dig up a mystery from years ago rather than using it in a current one?
I don't know. It's a good question. It's 3 boys and 3 consecutive springs or summers in this one small town. I'm not thinking of any particular real life event like that. But I do tend to have it's a crime, it's a suspense crime mystery. So something bad's got to happen to someone. So I thought that, well, maybe there's this history in this town that kind of haunts the current citizens, and some who have been around since the 70s and some who clearly have not been around since then. And how it's kind of a challenge that I set myself. How do I reconcile this old unsolved triple disappearance with the more immediate current plot line? How do they come to intersect? And that's I like to have a challenge like that. And I think I hate to say it's random, but it was like, well, it has a ring to it, 3 missing boys. It's creepy and compelling, and I don't know why they went missing or who done it. I have an idea between a couple of characters, but that could change by the time I get to the middle of the novel. I could find out that I could think, well, that would be really interesting if it turns out it was this person or not that person. And that was something that happened in Descent in a really radical way, when one of the characters turned out to have a very significant role to play that I didn't anticipate him having. So that goes back to, like, I don't know exactly what these things have to do with each other, but I'm going to write until I find out.
Well, good. And when can we expect that next writing?
Oh, well, like I said, if you look at the publication dates of these 3 books, there's almost exactly 4 years between each of them. Now, I always hope that it will be less than 4 years.
Okay.
That it will be more like 2 years.
And
I know authors who write a book every year, and that's just not me. I'm not that guy.
you were, if I understood you correctly, you were doing construction and writing at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What made you decide to start writing? Is that what you really wanted in the first place, and construction was just a way to keep living while you were experimenting?
Yeah. I never set out to be a carpenter. I went to graduate school with the express idea of learning to write, and being in a creative writing program. But when I got out of there, there was no like, oh, now you're a creative writing person and you can make a living as a writer. It just doesn't work that way. A lot of people go into teaching, and this was a long time ago, and there weren't a lot of teaching opportunities out there. And I really didn't want to spend all the kind of teaching opportunities that might have been available to me would have been, really pretty challenging and time consuming kinds of jobs. Like teaching 4 or 5 sections of composition, which is a lot of work, which I knew because I had taught those courses as a graduate student. So I turned my back on that and academia, and I just found a way. I sort of fell into making a living as a carpenter. My father was working on a house back here in Iowa at the time, and I came back and spent the summer working on that house, and one thing led to another, and I ended up out in California, and I was building movie sets and commercial sets and things with friends of mine who were already out there. And then I fell in with a contractor who I hit it off with, and he basically made a real serious carpenter out of me. You know, I learned how to do things right and pay attention to, you know, details, and so for pretty much the next 25 years, that's how I made a living. And I kept writing, and I had a novel, you know, published in 2002. My first was a young adult novel, and I was still fully a carpenter at the time. In fact, the LA Times, someone from the LA Times saw a review of the novel in Publishers Weekly, and looked me up and did a little piece on me, and because I was a carpenter and wanted to take pictures of me on swinging a hammer. It was because it was an interesting story, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, before I knew any biographical information about you, I after I finished Distant Sons, I thought, boy, this guy really knows a lot about construction. And then I thought, well, Karen, you don't know anything about it, so he could have made up the whole thing.
That's right.
But then I saw your biography, and now I know the truth. So
Yeah.
and that's
Well,
that's
yeah.
a good,
If you're convincing enough, you can pass. You can sort of pass as an expert for just about anything. And you know, you can Google everything anymore.
well,
So
isn't that the
I could have
truth?
Googled,
Yeah.
you know, I could have watched how-to videos and learned all that. But why would I? You know, if it wasn't an interest of mine and a passion of mine, it would be hard for me to write about that stuff. It has to be something that, and I do look up things. I don't know how to be a detective, for instance, and I have to look up certain things. But it's interesting to me. But the writing about the carpentry came very naturally, and it was already a part of both of these characters.
Mhm.
So, and that was another case of things that, you know, there was probably way more than there needed to be, and there may still be, but we chopped a lot of that out.
Okay. Just as you mentioned that you did do some young adult writing, and I don't know much about that, but could you speak to that a little bit on are you planning to continue to do both adult writing and young adult, and
Yeah.
how did you get into it, and then kind of segue into the adult field?
Well, like everything else, I didn't intend to get into it. It was I was just writing. Again, I was writing the best novel I could write at the time. I think it's a good novel. I'm still proud of it, even though it was written 20 years ago or more. But I thought I was writing an adult novel, and I was adamant about it being published as an adult novel. And my agent at the time was patient enough to send it out many, many times to adult publishers. But she did say you know, and a lot of those publishers wrote back saying, isn't this a young adult novel? Because it did have a young protagonist, and it was about the young people's lives, really. I thought it was too dark to be a young adult novel, but turns out there's no such thing as too dark for young adult
Yeah.
novels, especially now. But so my agent said, you know, I'm going to do this for a while, but eventually, if nobody takes it, I'll do this with the agreement that we try young adult. And I said, okay. And so we reached that point, and it had gone to many adult book editors. And then we sent it to the first young adult editor, who accepted it like immediately. So I was like, okay, I guess it's going to be a young adult novel. And they did a really good job publishing it. And I'm proud of it. I did have to rewrite it somewhat to, I guess, make it to feel even more like a young adult novel or something. Not any of the plot, but in particular, I had written it in first person. And for some reason, they thought it would be better to write it in third person. So I did that. I changed all the first person to third person, and then it was published pretty much as it was.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I had to answer your other question. No, it's not out of the question, but the young adult genre, like all these genres, are not genres that I actively read. If someone says this young adult novel is really exceptional and great, you should read it, I'll read it, but I don't seek them out, and I don't plan on trying to write another young adult novel, even though it's become a very, very robust industry, and a lot of very renowned literary authors and genre authors and literary genre authors are churning out young adult books.
So
So-
who do you read? Who are your authors that you read?
Well, I finally, it took me a long time to come to the table, but I finally started reading Cormac McCarthy, several years ago, and I just couldn't get enough of him. So I read pretty much everything he'd written pretty consecutively, and no doubt had a little sort of influence on my own aims and even stylistics. But there are other authors I really love. There's an author by the name of Teju Cole. Here, I have his new book right here. It's called, it might be backwards. Yeah, it's backwards. It's called Tremor. I haven't read it yet, but his book, Open City, is a book that I just read and reread, and I won't belabor it right now, but it's just, it really is a wonderful piece of writing. And it doesn't have like a gripping plot or anything. It's just very thoughtful, and the sentences are beautiful, and I always see something new in it. So I don't know, there's my bookshelf back there. I'd have to go right up to it to see what's on there, but yeah, those two will do for now, I think.
Okay, all right. Let me just see here. The Descent. This is the first one that way.
Yes.
This is the
Mhm.
first one I read. What would you like to say about it? What do you want people to know? And I'm sorry about all the reflection.
It's okay. Ultimately, I'd like them to know that it was the turning point in my career, that book. Up to that point, I'd written a young adult novel, and I had a short story collection come out. And I was determined that my next work would not be confused with young adult. And so I had, I sort of set out with like, well, this is going to be an adult novel, and how do I do that? And I write from a certain point of view and certain style and a certain subject matter. It took me 6 or 7 years to write. There was a lot of rewriting. I was working as a carpenter up in the Colorado Rockies at the time. Had I not been doing that, the idea never would have come to me to write about a family that goes up to the Rocky Mountains, and one of their children goes missing. You see a common theme in the two books. And so when it was finally published some years later, it sort of changed my life, because it did really well. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for a little while. And by that point, I was teaching creative writing myself in Memphis. And I was able to take a year off to write the next book under a contract, which was The Current. And I liked just writing so much, which is what I'd always just wanted to do. I'd always just wanted to be able to just write, even though there were things I really liked about teaching, and even things I really liked about carpentry. So after a year of just being a writer, I decided I wouldn't go back to Memphis. I would just start trying to be a writer full time. And so, and without that book, that wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. So it's very dear to me. And again, this one of its main characters, Sean Cortland, who is 15, I think, when that book begins. In this new book, he is now 26. So it's about 10 years later.
And The Current,
Yeah.
this doesn't have the reflection because
Oh, it is a kind of shiny, cool cover. It's like cracked ice. Yeah, I like that cover.
Oddly enough, this is just a side note. Dennis Lehane had said he thought that Current was better than Descent,
Yeah.
which is kind of unusual, because usually the author's first book is much better than the second one. I'm not sure why that is, but it
Well,
was.
they call it the sophomore slump. But and that's very kind of Dennis to say, and a number of people actually said that. But I think they've both got arguments for, and I don't know what better even means. It's just really who you are as a reader and what you respond
Yeah.
to. But I think all three books are have their own you can make a case for each one of them, not better, but being good on its own terms.
That sounds like a good definition. Before I introduce the next question, I have to say that the area you write in on this third book is, I lived in Minnesota and I lived in Wisconsin, so some of the environments you created were very reminiscent of ones, and there were a lot of places that I really enjoyed the writing, and there was one particular paragraph that was, I don't know why it was special. I just know it made me feel something. So I showed it to my 18-year-old granddaughter because she's an aspiring writer.
Mhm.
She was quite taken with it. And then I showed it to my supervisor, and he was also taken by it, as was I. So I just wanted you to know we've gone through 3 generations here. So it's appealing to a lot of different people.
Well, now I want to know what section it was, what part it was.
Well, I can tell you it was page 287, which is the 34th chapter, and it's the one about the day when there is rain and through the different times when the rain
Yeah,
appearance changes.
right. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that too.
yeah, and that's one of the things I see resonating throughout the book, but that one particularly just drew me.
Yeah. Well,
Really.
I'm glad. It's always glad to hear those things, and particularly if multiple people feel the same way. But
Yeah.
I distinctly remember writing that and thinking, really taking my time with it and trying to make it as evocative as it could be. It was it was signaling, and usually when you get into those passages, it's signaling some kind of change in, not just the weather, but change in how things are going, that something significant is about to happen. And indeed it does in that chapter.
One of the questions in some of the reviews I read is there's a lot of what ifs here. What if John and Dan had never come together? And it struck me that you can read the book and talk about the what ifs of the characters in the books, but you can also look at your own life and say, what if? Did that occur to you at all? Did that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we all do that. And sometimes we have to do it in the worst way, like something terrible happens and we think, oh, what if I'd done this differently? This terrible thing would have happened. And I think that's what a lot of people who survive a trauma are sort of struggle with, like in Descent, the family, after their daughter goes missing, they probably ask themselves a lot of what ifs. What if we hadn't come here? What if we, not let her go up in the mountains like that, or so I do, and and what if I'd never gone to Colorado to work on that house? I never would have written that book. So, but in the case of this Distant Sons, it all it was compelling to me because I wanted it to be seen, and it is, unless you believe in fate and predestination, but I wanted it to seem very sort of accidental and just random, that these 2 young men sort of meet in this Wisconsin town. And then it's sort of the choices they make. They decide, one decides to sort of see if the other one wants to do some work, and that one thing leads to another. And by the time, things really get sort of the stakes get very high, they both start to, wonder, well, geez, what if we had never met?
Yeah.
Things might have gone a different way. So
Well,
the whole book is kind of predicated on a chance meeting, and that sort of, not that I was actively pursuing that theme, but I became kind of consciously aware of it over time.
well, and I think too, and you maybe have already said this, the what if can be good or bad. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily one or the other all
Yeah.
the time.
And there are some good things that happen. I don't want the reader to get
Yeah.
the idea it's all bad.
Yeah. And
There are some consequences that turn out to be, on the good side rather than the bad side.
well, and you put some humor in there from time
Yeah.
to time, so it lightens it up a little bit.
Okay.
Another thing I noticed, in your dialogue, now this is in the year of 2018, not the 1977 one.
Mhm.
The characters, when asked a question, just answered the question. They didn't editorialize, they didn't embellish. Is that your truck? Yes. And that was all the person would respond with, because that was the answer to the question. So it's what I called an economy of words when it came to the dialogue. And there were a few exceptions where that probably didn't take place, but for the most part, did you do that deliberately?
It's hard to define deliberately in this sense. I do it because it's my style, and it's a
Oh.
style that I've sort of been, counting on or developing throughout these 3 novels. But it's also, I think, has to do with having characters who are kind of not super forthcoming in general about
Mhm.
their history, their past. They're not talky, which is something I can relate to as a Midwesterner. It's not, we're not known for the putting forth of emotions, like into talking about things. So these are solidly Midwestern young men who were kind of brought up in that environment, but also have reason to be quiet. They've had
Yeah.
some hard knocks, and they don't really want to share that experience with people, or they don't trust people, as a result of what's happened to them. So I think it's kind of that sort of laconic kind of brevity of words comes out of that. But it's also, I love dialogue that is just like kind of snappy and moves along and gets to the point and doesn't get all talky.
Yeah.
I get the talkiness out in my descriptions, and try to keep the talking to a minimum.
Well, I think you've certainly done it well on this book.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, I understand that you have some motion picture options
Yes.
for
Yeah.
the Descent and the Current. Is that
Yes.
correct? And
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about what all that involves? I know that from other authors, there's a lot of discussion and how much control you have and all that sort of thing. So could you address that?
Sure. Well, an option just means that someone has sort of rented the rights for a period of time, usually anywhere from a year to 18 months or so. And while they have rented the rights, you can't rent the rights out to anybody else, or nobody else can make the film. And during that period, they're trying to get enough of the ducks in a row that they need to get in a row. For instance, directors, financing, studios, even actors, that they can greenlight it and go ahead and buy the rights, which is different from optioning. So once they buy the rights, they own the rights to the movie forever. So both of these books were optioned like right out of the gate, and neither have been made yet, and neither have been bought yet. They've just been optioned all this. And Descent, that was a long time ago. So Descent has been optioned and reoptioned by the same people for a long time, and sort of one thing or another, and has sort of slowed things down or set things back. And that's Hollywood. I mean, that's what anybody who has spent any time in the business or has been an author with these options, by and large, the name of the game is patience and sort of putting it out of your mind. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And we were moving along with the current, which was optioned right out of the gate also, and was being developed as a limited series on HBO Max. And then HBO Max had a huge sort of corporate, they kind of had a corporate disaster where they had to cut their budget severely and let all kinds of projects go. On the very last second, they let the current go. And but now we still have a director and a writer and a we're, you know, they're going to take it out to other financiers and studios and things like that, producers. But as for how much involvement I have, it's really up to them. It's not contractual in any way, that I get to have any kind of say. It's really just, it tends to be that the people who option it tend to be people who are interested in making a movie that I will be proud of, that I will not be disturbed by, but beyond that, it's like, it's up to them whether they want my input or not, or if they want to talk about it. And I've been lucky in that in both cases, they talked to me quite a bit, and not that it really has moved things along in any way, but it's kind of nice to be able to keep an eye on things and, get updated on what's going on, and know that they're interested in my thoughts. So that's what those are. We didn't set out to actively try and option the new one. For one thing, it came out in the middle of a writer's strike, and at the very end of the writer's strike. But as things happened, in both cases, somebody else came to us. We weren't actively, by us, I mean my agent, my movie agent, and my literary agent, who worked together. But someone just had read the book and was in the movie business and wanted to, see about getting it made and getting the option, and that's how that tends to happen in my experience. So we'll wait, we'll see. Maybe someone will offer any minute now to option this one too. But things have gone so crazy since the pandemic, and everything was shut down for that.
Yeah.
And then there was the writer strike, and now they haven't resolved the actor strike, and the whole industry has kind of been turned on its head.
Sounds like you need some patience to go into that type of thing.
Yeah, and as an author, you can't sit around, waiting for your book to come out on the big screen or something. It's like, you just got to put it out of your mind and keep writing.
And are you currently writing on your working on your next book?
I am in the sense that, like I said, it's usually a pretty long time between finishing one and starting really getting into the next. And I'm in the what I call the receptivity phase. So I'm highly receptive to an idea, but I shouldn't, this is the last thing my editor and agent ever want to hear, but I haven't actually started writing. So when I do, I generally don't tell them. I generally, I keep that to myself. Because I don't want them to ask me how the writing is going.
Oh.
And because it may go very bad, and I might decide to not pursue the project anymore at all. I might just, who knows? So I like to keep it to myself for as long as I can.
Well, when you say you're waiting, for an idea to come along, whatever, are you actively in search of an idea, or are you kind of just going along until it hits you in the face?
Well, I'm not looking around the world saying, would this be a good idea? Would that be a good idea? I am just open to whatever my brain wants to generate based on whatever I'm seeing or reading or thinking about. And some thoughts have come and gone, and my philosophy is the same as it's always been. I don't write these ideas down. I don't try to start writing when I think I have a good idea. I always have just put the idea out of my mind as best I can, and it's when I can't put it out of my mind and it starts to really preoccupy me, that's when I start writing.
Okay.
And it's almost like I just got to do this to get it out of the way and see if it, there's no guarantee it's going to turn into a novel.
Well, you sound like you're open to, starting something and recognizing if it's not going to work, then move on to something else. And are you,
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, are you still working in construction?
I am in a highly selective, optional way. I don't do it to make a living. If I actually, the house you see behind me, I came here and I started renting it to when I was working on the current for a year, and then I rented it for another 5 years when I didn't go back to teaching. And 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago or so, I had the chance to buy it, so I bought it. And it's a 100-year-old house, so there's a lot to do. But I also knew, being a carpenter, this is one of the advantages I had, and having lived here as long as I had, I knew everything about it. I knew what I was getting into, and it wasn't like there have been any, oh my God, there's a hole in the floor that I didn't see because there was a rug over it.
Yeah.
It's like, I know everything about this house and I knew what I was getting into, and I have no one to blame but myself. So it's, and often, it's doing that kind of work that frees up my brain to think about story ideas, about narratives. And it's exactly what I was doing when Descent came to me. When the current came to me, I actually was reading student papers in a coffee shop in Memphis. So who knows, I may be down in the basement repairing the grout in the walls or something, and I'll get the idea for the next one.
Okay, we have some listeners who have questions for you.
Cool. Okay.
First one is, what's the best piece of advice that you received as an author?
As an author, as a writer? So,
well, they say author.
As an author, I don't know that I received it, but I think the advice that I would give to myself is be happy in all your interactions with people along the way. Be ever grateful that people are interested in your work and championing it and publishing it at all. I always try to keep in mind that they're doing their jobs and I'm doing my job, and there's no reason that we shouldn't just make it as pleasant as possible and as upbeat, and so and I have no reason not to be upbeat. But I know authors who, who they don't feel like they're getting the, quite the treatment that they or their work should be getting from their publisher or whatever. And I've heard those stories many times, and I was just like, well, maybe it's the energy you're putting out there. I don't know. So I think as an author, well, for one, you should always keep working at what you love and don't try and please anybody else. I think I do my best work when no one's really looking over my shoulder expecting it. So that's what I'm trying to do with this next one too. I mean, it's like I'm writing a certain kind of novel, and I'm not going to try and write one that people are maybe expecting or wanting. I'm just going to try and write the novel that I want to write and would like to read.
Okay, next question. What's been the thing that you're most proud of when you look back on being a carpenter?
Staying with it. I spent a lot of years, and this is true of writing too, a lot of years learning the craft. And it resulted in becoming a master, basically. I mean, there's nothing I really can't do in carpentry. I'm not always I'm not the best at it, but I know how to do it. But I guess the most proud single thing was actually, I did some really fine work on this house in Colorado that I was working on when I started writing Descent. And there's, some kind of beautiful sort of woodsy Colorado things I did up there and I did entirely on my own. I was up there by myself for a long time, and I think it was kind of sort of the opus of my carpentry life, was doing all the work on this house.
Okay, next question. Do you have any weird writing habits?
Weird writing habits. Weird writing habits. Boy, I don't know what constitutes weird. I don't think so. I will, when I am writing, I will get up from bed and go directly to my sofa and lay down and start reading, fall back asleep. My dog is out laying on the sofa also. But when the going is good, I'm not reading for very long before I put the book aside and put the laptop up. And I never sit at a desk. I don't know if that's weird. I'm always reclining in some way. That began in Colorado because there was no desk there. There was just a recliner. So I put a pillow on my lap and started writing on my laptop. But I can't think of anything particularly weird.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Who do you recommend that people read? I think you mentioned a couple of folks.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody style and preference and taste in reading is just so personal. If you're into, really thoughtful, beautiful language making, sentence making, and not so much in, page turning excitement, then I go back to the Teju Cole who I mentioned earlier. And Open City, which is just a beautiful sort of, it's a book that sort of lives and breathes in New York City, but it has a deeper kind of psychological narrative going on that isn't easy to pick up the first time. So I love some of Cormac McCarthy's novels for the same reason, because his language is kind of just amazing, and I always respond to really strong writing. And again, I don't really read books that I sometimes get compared to in the genre mystery crime sense. So I really can't. Well, although I must say, since we brought up Michael Carita a couple times, you should, if you're into that kind of, if you're into crime and mystery and that kind of thing, he's terrific, and he's a very good writer, great writer. His new one is called An Honest Man, and that will be coming out forthcoming.
Okay, last question. What do you like to do when you aren't writing?
Well, I read. I read, I watch movies and TV. I have a dog who needs to go out quite a bit. She needs a lot of exercise, and I ride my bike with her. And when I'm writing, that's all. I ride the bike and I'm thinking about what I've been writing and what I'm going to do when I get back from riding the bike, and she runs alongside me. And when I'm in a good mood and into the swing of things, I love doing my projects, working on the house in some way or another. So yeah, those are my things.
Okay.
And eat.
And eat. Are you
Eat.
your own cook?
Yeah, but that's not saying much. I don't really cook. I have my things that I can make easily and quickly, and but for some reason I agreed to do Christmas at my house this year for my family, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to make how to get a hold of a turkey.
You might want to start in on that now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay,
see.
so do you have any final words of wisdom for your readers?
Well, I don't really, I mean, for readers, I just say go out of your comfort zone from time to time. You know, it's fun to read the writers you really love and the stories and the kind, you know, if you have a series that you like to read, like my mother was really into the Louise Penny series for a while, read all those, but then she'll go way out of swing out and read something else entirely. And that's kind of what I like to do. I like to just sort of be open to whatever comes across my desk. It doesn't have to be fiction, you know. It's I'm reading a book called An Immense World, which is all about, it's a
Yeah.
very sciencey book, you know. It's all about how other creatures perceive the world and or experience the world. And for a writer, that's kind of juicy stuff. It's really kind of great to sort of think about how it's like, it goes to the heart of point of view. You know, what's the point of view of a bat? You know, how does a bat experience the world as opposed to how we experience? Anyway, things
So,
like that really interest me, and they often work their way into my writing. You know, who knows? I might some of this information might end up. I might have a character who like knows weird things about animals, and it came from this book.
and what would you advise writers or would-be writers? What would be your best advice?
Pretty much the same thing. Read, you know, read out of your comfort zone, and if you can, and sometimes it takes going to school like I did, and taking classes that teach you how to do it, but you have to sort of learn to read like a writer. You know, it's not enough just to read for pleasure or read for story. You kind of have to learn to slow the process down, you know, almost like hitting slow-mo on the remote, and figure out how things are put together, and you know, you picked up on the lack of quotation marks in those past passages. Why is he doing that? You know, what's the point of that? What's you know, how does that change how I'm reading this? It can for a while sort of take some of the life out of reading, you know, some of the fun out of it, as you start really slowing down and paying attention to every little thing. But ultimately, I think it makes you, if you're interested in writing, it makes every book a teacher, you know, if you can really sort of look at it that way.
You know, now that you mention it, when you said, you know, when I first wondered about why no quotation marks, I would also think well, it's really for anybody, a sense of curiosity is essential to finding things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. When I was young, I remember that moment, you know, when I realized I wanted to be a writer, I started realizing why paragraph breaks were the way they were, and how quotation marks signaled a new speaker, because it was in a new paragraph, and it was like things I'd just done automatically. You know, I just read these things automatically without thinking about them, and just the basic construction on the page. It just began, it was like the veil had been lifted from my eyes, and it didn't ruin the experience. It just made it, I just learned so much just about being curious about it. Like you said, why is it done this way?
Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And I really appreciate your books. They're great. And I look forward to your next one, even though you're still just thinking about it.
Well, it'll come around.
Okay.
It'll come around eventually.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone watching.